Mr. Biggs, this is Anita.
Yes. Anita?
Hi. Would you be able to give me a call sometime tomorrow or Monday?
Yes. I can give you a call tomorrow.
Okay. What kind of sort of works good?
Let me see. I think I have a 10 o'clock meeting and then a 1 o'clock meeting. So 9 or 11?
Yeah, let's do 9.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're tomorrow morning at 9.
Yeah, find my home phone, and if you can't, then ping me on email and I'll send it to you.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thanks.
So I think we have a quorum, but I don't know if we want to wait another minute or two.
It's up to you, Mr. Chairman. We can give it a couple more minutes if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe another minute just in case
Okay.
someone else joins.
All right. Then we'll take roll on your signal.
Okay.
Here. I think Eric's joining too.
Yeah, he's here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm in. Yeah.
Oh, no, a different Eric.
Different Eric. Oh,
Yes.
the Eric with a K who can't spell his own name.
Yeah, it's Eric, yeah, with a K, yeah.
Right. I had a boss whose son-in-law was also named Eric, and he spelled his name correctly, and he insisted on spelling our names E-R-I-C-K or E-R-I-C-H, right? He couldn't get it right. So. But I think I saw him on. I think he's on the list.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, Jolie.
Hello.
Our world.
I have 2 Susan Messengers. Who is? Yeah, I might have mislabeled.
Well, I've been known to do this too, because when you have multiple machines, you sometimes end up on several times looking for something that will work. The joys of Ring Central.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have 5 now. So I think we have 5 now. So I think we're good.
Okay.
So yeah, whenever you're ready.
All right. Let me take roll. Chair Ahi.
Here.
Vice Chair Bodnar. Doesn't look like Vice Chair Bodnar present. Commissioner Doran.
Here.
Commissioner Merrick.
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger. I see her, so she's
There
present.
were 2 of her somewhere.
Yep, she's here. She's muted right now. Commissioner Roche.
Here.
Present. And Commissioner Steinle.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chairman, before you begin, we do have one request for a change to the order of the agenda. Because we have a guest presenter tonight from our city attorney's office, We were hoping to move up item number 3, the legislative update, in front of item number 2, the 140 Lyell project.
Oh, okay, yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, we
Thank
can
you.
swap that around. Yeah.
Thank
It's
you
the
for
most
that
fun we'll
change.
have all year.
So yeah, so I guess we'll just start off then with public comments on items not on the agenda. Is there anyone on the call with a comment for items not on the agenda? I don't know if you can maybe raise your hand in the chat or just say something. I don't see anyone. So I'll move on. But if that changes, just let me know. So next up, Planning Commission minutes from October 15th, 2020 and November 5th, 2020. If anyone has comments on those or wants to make a motion to approve those, either one.
Would it be appropriate to move to approve them both, or do they have to be done separately? That's kind of a John/Jolie question, but.
You can move to approve both of them. And then I will tell you that even if you were not on the commission at the time that for these meetings, you can still participate. There was a change to that rule. So you can, because you're only just approving them as the minutes, as to form. You're not approving like the validity of the minutes or so if there's new people, you can still participate and vote on accepting. You're just accepting them for filing purposes. So you can, so new people can still vote on them.
All right, since nothing excites me more than a legislative update, I am going to move that we approve the minutes of both the October 15 and the November 5 meetings.
I'll second it for you.
We can take roll then. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. So we have a second to approve both sets of minutes for the October 15th and November 11th, or excuse me,
sorry.
November 5th Planning
Right.
Commission meeting. Chair Ahi,
Yes.
Commissioner Doran,
Yes.
Commissioner Merrick,
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Roche,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinle.
Yes.
The minutes are approved.
Okay, great. So we will move on to item 3, legislative update for the Planning Commission.
Okay, I'll just give a brief introduction. This is the associate that works in our public law land use department, Eric Rush. I always mess up his last name, and you can correct me, Eric.
Ramakrishnan.
Ramakrishnan. And
Just
he,
as the way it's written.
and I know I mess it up all the time. So and he comes to our firm. He came on board in around April. He onboarded during COVID, and he comes from a good background from county counsel's office and also from the city of Fremont. And he's also worked for a private housing land use firm. And we're very, very happy to have him on board. And so he's going to give you the latest and greatest laws that just were passed. And one of them, I believe, Eric, and you can correct me, is in effect now, but the rest of them
Right.
will be in effect in 2021. And so he's also going to give a very high level review of SB 330 and Housing Accountability Act and SB 35, because some of these laws are amending those former laws. So you might not understand what's getting amended if you don't understand what was existing. So we're going to do a little high level review, and then he's going to get into the nuts and bolts of these recent changes. And one thing I can say is the 2021 housing bills, there's only a few of them, instead of like 2020 when we had, so many bills, and we had all sorts of overlapping and related bills, like with the ADUs and with Housing Accountability Act and SB 330. This year has been sort of a little bit of a break in the housing law frenzy. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric and let him start with his legislative update.
Okay, thanks, Jolie. Okay, so like Jolie said, we're going to start off talking about some laws that are already in effect. Either in some cases because these laws implicate the new laws, or else at the very least just because you should know about them if you aren't already familiar with them. This is kind of, especially the first one, the Housing Accountability Act. This is an existing law. This isn't a new law, but this is the bread and butter of what you're going to get into with a lot of your work. So it's really important. So the Housing Accountability Act applies to housing development projects. And so HCD has decided that includes anytime you have 2 or more housing units in a single project. And HCD has decided that even includes a single family home that's being built with an ADU. So think of a housing development project as 2 or more housing units. A housing development project, if it complies with all of the city's objective standards, then it can't be denied unless certain very difficult to make findings are made. And so when I say objective standards, I'm going to refer to objective and subjective standards. When I refer to objective standards, I'm referring to something that 2 reasonable people should be able to agree whether the project is. So if I say that something has to be green, we should be able to come to some sort of consensus as to whether or not that's objective. That objective has been met. If I say it has to be 9 meters or 9 feet tall, we can pull out a tape measure and objectively determine if that standard has been met. A subjective standard is something where you have to apply your subjective opinion. So a subjective standard would be like the project is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. 2 different people who are very reasonable could come to 2 different reasonable conclusions on that. Something like that. So if a housing development project complies with all objective standards, then it must be approved at the density proposed by the developer. The exception is if the approval authority identifies a specific adverse health or safety impact of the project. Also, all of this is subject to CEQA. So if the project were to be denied because of CEQA, that would be another reason you could still deny it. But what do I mean by specific adverse health or safety impact? There's a very strict definition of what that is in the Act. It's an impact on health or safety that's on the basis of some objective criteria, published criteria that was in effect when the applicant applied to develop the project. So you can't just say, I don't think that driveway looks safe. You have to be able to point to some sort of standard detail or engineering specification that demonstrates that it's an unsafe feature, for example. If a housing development project provides at least 20% affordable housing, then there are additional findings you would have to make on top of that health or safety finding to deny. And you also cannot condition the project in a way that would make it infeasible for housing unless you can make one of those. You can there's still a purpose for a discretionary review, even if a project is subject to the Housing Accountability Act. The approval authority can still condition the project based on subjective standards, unless those conditions have the effect of reducing density or making the project so infeasible that the condition effectively denies the project. Are there any questions about that? Okay. The next law I want to talk about is a law that went into effect as of January this year, and that is as SB 330. SB 330 had a number of components. I'm going to talk about 5 of them. sorry to interrupt. There's somebody who can maybe needs to mute their.
I just muted Commissioner Marek. There was some background noise. So.
Okay, all right. I apologize. So I'm going to talk about 5 components of SB 330 that I think would be helpful to understand. One is that SB 330 provided what's called a pre-application procedure. So if an applicant is interested in developing a housing development project, again, same definition of housing development project, even before the applicant submits the actual application for the project, the applicant can submit what's called a pre-application. And the statute, SB 330, has in there the specific information and documents that need to be included in that pre-application. And if the applicant submits all of that information to the agency, there's no sort of approval process or deeming complete process that goes along with that. But just the fact that the agency has that information on file and is aware that the project is coming down the pipe, the agency's standards as of the date that the pre-application was submitted are locked into place. So there's some vesting. It doesn't last forever, and there are some exceptions to that, but that is a way that a developer can lock in standards even before they apply for the project. They need to then submit the application within 180 days or they lose out on that vesting. The application process itself is a lot tighter now. The agency needs to tell the applicant upfront what they need to submit with their application. And then when the agency sends an incomplete letter, if the application is not complete, that incomplete letter needs to provide a complete and exhaustive list of what's missing from the application. There's a new 5 hearing rule. So once the application is deemed complete, after that time, the agency can only hold 5 hearings on the project prior to approval. That includes appeals, and that includes community meetings that are sponsored by the city. There's a new replacement housing requirement. So this already applied to a density bonus project, which we'll talk about in a second. But if a developer is going to build a housing development project on a site that has housing or has had housing in the last 5 years, the developer needs to build at least as many units as were already there. And may need to replace affordable units with affordable units. And then there's also a downsizing or a no net loss requirement. So a city cannot now downzone a site. So if the site was zoned for 20 dwelling units per acre, the city can't downzone it unless it finds somewhere else in the city to sort of make up the units that would be potentially lost by doing that. So those are the 5 main parts of SB 330 that went into effect this year. And then the last thing I want to give you just a heads up about, because it comes up with most projects nowadays, and there was a change to this law this year that I'll talk about later on in the presentation, is density bonus law. So the density bonus law is a state law that provides a developer with certain incentives if the developer provides certain levels of affordability on site. So for example, if the developer provides 11% of the units within the project as very low income, then the developer gets a certain density bonus increase and some other incentives for that. So anytime a developer is eligible for a density bonus, and the size of the bonus depends upon what level of affordability they're offering, they get an increase in density, which they do not have to take if they don't want to. They also get a certain number of concessions, and a concession is an exception to the city's local standards the developer can request, and the city has limited discretion to deny it. And the concession it has to be designed to reduce the cost of development for affordable housing. So the goal of the concession is to help subsidize the developer's cost of providing affordable housing units. The developer is also entitled to an unlimited number of waivers, and a waiver is an exception from a city requirement that would otherwise make the density bonus project physically impossible to build. And then the developer is also entitled to certain automatic parking reductions that they can take even without requesting concessions and waivers for those parking reductions. So those are the 4 things you get if you provide affordable units as part of your project. Okay, so those are laws that are already in effect. Does anybody have any questions about those before I jump into what's new? Okay. So the first law that that passed this year, and as Jolie said, there aren't that many this year. In previous years, there were many more new laws to share, but because of COVID, the legislature wasn't in session for most of this year. But one thing they did do because of COVID is they adopted AB 1561, which extends land use entitlements for developers who were prevented from building out their projects because of COVID. So it extends most land use entitlements for housing development projects if the entitlement was issued before April 4th, 2020, and if it expires prior to or on December 31st, 2021. So if it was issued before that date and expires on or before the end of next year, then this law applies. And this law extends the term of the entitlement automatically without having to request an extension from the agency for 18 months. And there are some exceptions. I don't think it's a good use of our time here to list them, so I didn't, but they're listed in the statute that I cite there. Part of this was to help developers, but also part of it was to help agencies, because a lot of agencies sort of felt they ought to do this anyways, and you know, it's not really helpful to the agency to have a flood of applications for extensions. And so this just does it automatically. The next two laws that I'm going to talk about amended SB 35. SB 35 is a fourth law that's already in effect. I wanted to put the sort of primer on it here rather than at the beginning of the presentation because I'm now going to talk about two bills that amended it. So SB 35 was originally enacted in 2017 and it went into effect in 2018. And it provides a process for streamlined ministerial approval of certain housing development projects and mixed-use projects. And a key advantage of this process is because it's what we call ministerial, which means that if you meet certain requirements, you get your approval. There's no discretionary process at all, not even to look at conditions of approval that might modify your project a little bit without denying it or reducing the density. There's none of that here. It's strictly ministerial. There's no discretion if you meet all the requirements. And for a project that is ministerial like that, CEQA doesn't apply. So a key advantage of getting your project approved through SB 35 is there's no CEQA review. Again, like I said, ministerial means that if you meet the criteria, you get an approval. There's no exercise of discretion. Most of the law is the long list of criteria that you have to meet to qualify. I've heard qualifying projects described as unicorn projects because it's very hard. You know, these projects do come along, but it's not going to be your typical housing project because of all of the requirements the developer has to meet. One of the requirements is an affordable housing component, and how deep that level of affordability has to be depends upon a couple of factors, most particularly whether the agency is meeting its RHNA numbers, and if so, is it meeting its RHNA numbers across the board, or just for affordable or just for market rate. And then for most of these projects, the developer has to pay prevailing wage to workers, and frequently will have to actually also hire union labor. Among the criteria also, the project has to comply with all of the district's objective standards. And there's a long list of types of parcels that one of these projects can't be built upon. And we're looking at sensitive areas like wildlife habitat, fire zones, parcels with historic resources on site, that kind of thing. And there's some other criteria there too. The whole list is like 3 to 5 pages long. It's quite lengthy. If you do meet all of the requirements, then you're entitled to get your project approved without a discretionary process. That's already the law. AB 168 amended SB 35 to protect tribal cultural resources. And there are a number of communities around the Bay Area that where tribal cultural resources abound. So this is potentially going to be a bit of a game changer. AB 168 went into effect immediately. Most bills don't take effect until January 1st, but there are some exceptions, and this is one of them. So as of, I think, September, this is already the law. Unrelated to SB 35, there was provision in there that affected SB 330 and the Housing Accountability Act. So I indicated that with SB 330, you can vest the standards that are in place at the time you submit the pre-app, and with the Housing Accountability Act, if your project complies with the objective standards in place at the time your application was deemed complete, the agency has limited discretion to deny or condition the project. The SB 168 says that if a tribal cultural resource is listed on a federal, state, or local register after the pre-app or after the application is deemed complete, that's not considered a new standard. It's treated as though it were a standard in place at the time of the pre-app or the application. So that could affect some projects that are already in the pipeline. So that's one aspect that affected 330, but the rest of it affects SB 35. So to give a little background on AB 168 that I think will make it make a lot more sense. SB 35 addressed parcels with historic resources on them, but it did not address parcels with tribal cultural resources. And it's difficult for a process that's exempt from CEQA and that calls for streamlined ministerial approval to really address tribal cultural resources, because Indigenous nations will often keep the knowledge they have about tribal cultural resources confidential, because if that information is widely known, there are grave robbers and vandals and thieves who will steal that cultural property or vandalize it. It happens, and it's a real concern. So we often we being government agencies often don't know where these tribal cultural resources are even located, because the tribes will keep that information confidential to protect those resources. The normal mechanism through which we find out about tribal cultural resources is CEQA, through a process called consultation, which provides for confidentiality so the tribe can disclose that information and not bring it into the public record. But SB 35 an SB 35 project is CEQA exempt, so we don't have that tribal consultation process for these projects. So there were SB 35 projects being approved that were disturbing tribal cultural resources, and there was no mechanism to stop that. So AB 168 corrects that oversight. How does it correct that oversight? From now on, if an applicant wants to submit an application for an SB 35 project, before they submit the application, they need to file a notice of intent. The notice of intent is exactly the same as what a pre-application looks like under SB 330. It contains all the same information. But it lets the agency know also that this is going to be an SB 35 project. This is before the applicant even submits the actual SB 35 application. Once the agency gets that notice of intent, it needs to contact the Native American Heritage Commission, which is a state agency. The Native American Heritage Commission identifies any Native American tribes with an interest in the geographic area of the proposed project. The agency has 30 days from the time it received the notice of intent, both to contact the Native American Heritage Commission, hear back, and then send out an invitation to consult any tribes that were identified by the commission. After that invitation to consult is received by a tribe, it then has 30 days to respond. And then the city has 30 more days to commence consultation. So you're looking at a 90-day process to the start of consultation. The applicant, the housing development project applicant, may participate in the process if the tribe consents. But again, because of confidentiality issues, tribes usually won't consent unless the applicant will sign a non-disclosure agreement, which is actually fairly typical practice in my experience of having done tribal consultation. The consultation process itself is not a project for purposes of CEQA. That seems sort of obvious, but it must have been alleged at some point that consultation is a project because the legislature felt it needed to say that. So out of that process, we find out if there are tribal cultural resources on the site. And the project cannot go forward as an SB 35 project, even if it otherwise would have qualified. If, first of all, it's established separate and apart from consultation that there are tribal cultural resources that federal, state, and local agencies do know about and have on lists similar to historic resource inventories. If a tribal cultural resource is actually known to the agency and listed, then necessarily this can't be an SB 35 project. But most tribal cultural resources won't be listed for the reasons I explained. So it also cannot be an SB 35 project unless one of the following is true. Either no tribe responded to the invitation to consult, or any tribe that does respond agrees that the project won't affect tribal cultural resources, or the applicant and the tribe enter into an enforceable agreement to protect that resource, and that has to be a condition of project approval. This is novel because typically you don't have conditions for SB 35 projects because they're ministerial. If there's no listed resource on the site and one of these is true, then the project can go forward as an SB 35 project as planned. Otherwise, the city notifies the tribe and the applicant that the process does not qualify. AB 831 also amended SB 35, and this is a big game changer, actually. As I mentioned, so this does two things. I indicated that SB 35 projects are ministerial and they have to be approved. One issue that will arise is sometimes a project will require public improvements as part of the project, and over that, cities could still exercise discretion, and cities were using that process as a backdoor to deny SB 35 projects and to make them discretionary. This 831, one of the two things it does is it says you can't do that anymore. If a project requires discretionary approval of a public improvement, the city has to apply objective criteria to approve or disapprove of that public improvement. It can't use different considerations than it would normally use for any other housing development project just because it's an SB 35 project. The other thing it does, as AB 831 does, is it changes the process, I think, significantly for what happens after the applicant of an SB 35 project gets their approval and they want to modify the project. The city must now, effective January 1st, approve the modification if the project will still be consistent with objective standards that were in effect at the time the application was originally submitted. And the city cannot reinterpret its own requirements to avoid approval of modifications. So if the city had a standard that's subject to some interpretation, it needs to apply whatever interpretation it was applying at the time the project was originally approved. And this is the big game changer, I think. The modification request does not reopen the original approval. So typically for housing development projects or any kind of project, the applicant can stand on an entitlement that they've already received, but if they want to make changes, then that opens up the door to all of the city's new standards that might be in effect now, that might not have been before at the time of the original approval. For an SB 35 project, that's no longer true. You don't reopen the project and look at changes in your standards generally. You're just looking at the modification, and you're judging the modification from the standards that were in place at the time that the original application was submitted. Approval of the modification needs to be done within 60 days. It can be extended to 90 days if design review is required. This is an odd thing in SB 35. SB 35 says you have no discretion, it's ministerial, but you can still have a body like the Planning Commission or the City Council make that ministerial determination. They just don't have any discretion. I don't think anyone really knows what the point of that is, but if your agency does that, takes advantage of that, then that extends the time to approve of the modification request. And this last bullet point is a little bit bizarre. So HCD has power under SB 35 to issue interpretive guidelines, and those interpretive guidelines have the force of law. They can even add things to SB 35 that aren't in the legislation. They're within reason, they're considered to have the force of law. HCD can't say something contrary to what's in SB 35 or outside the scope of SB 35 through that process, but the legislature did give them the power. 831 says that if HCD has issued a guideline interpreting SB 35 between the time of the original project application submission and the modification application submission, and if that guideline would prevent the applicant from getting their requested modification, then we ignore the new guideline. We act as if HCD hadn't issued that guideline. There are some exceptions to this process. If the modification involves an increase in a total number of units or a total square footage of 15% or more, then the applicant isn't entitled to all these protections. If the increase is 5% or more and the project would have a specific adverse health or safety impact, then the applicant is not entitled to all of those protections that I described. I find that a little odd too, because I would think that if a project had a specific adverse health or safety impact, because that's such a high standard, I would think that the health or safety impact itself would justify denial of the modification. But there's this extra burden of establishing a 5% increase in square footage or number of units. And if the modification would violate an objective standard in the state's building code, not a local building code, it's not a subjective standard, it's an objective standard in the state's building code, you shall deny the modification. Any questions on that before I go to 1851?
Will you be giving us a copy of all your slides today?
I can provide them with staff, and Jolie, is that okay with you?
Thank you.
Yeah, we can send them to staff, and staff can send them out to you all. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I think the next law is actually interesting. It relates to religious institution affiliated housing, and about half the statute is some complicated definitions. I have some concerns with one of them, but I won't go into the details on that. But so this new law deals with what's referred to as religious institution affiliated housing, and a housing development project is a religious institution affiliated housing development project if it meets all of those criteria. First, it has to be a housing development project, again, 2 or more units. The project needs to be located on 1 or more contiguous parcels. Makes sense, the parcels need to be together. That's typically true of a housing development project. The land needs to be owned by a religious institution or an LLC or corporation that's wholly owned by the religious institution. I'm going to define religious institution in a couple of slides, so put a pin there and hold on to that. We're talking about land owned by religious institutions. The land needs to be on, adjacent to, or within 1/10 of a mile of religious use parking, which I'll get to in a second. And the project needs to qualify for a state density bonus. In other words, it's necessary that there be a certain amount of affordable housing on site. And that also adds an extra element of this because a state density bonus project must be at least 5 base units. So we're actually dealing with projects of 5 or more units rather than just 2 or more. So if a project meets all of those, then it's in play for this law. Religious use parking. So remember, we have to be on, adjacent to, or near religious use parking. Religious use parking means parking required under local standards for places of worship. So we're talking about temples, synagogues, churches, mosques, etc. It's parking that the local parking code requires for the project site. So if a church, for example, is overparked, they have more parking than they're required to have. The excess is not religious use parking, just the amount they're required to have. And a religious institution means an institution owned, controlled, and operated and maintained by a bona fide church, religious denomination, or religious organization, composed of multi-denominational members of the same well-recognized, lawfully operated, and etc. Anyway, an institution devoted to religious teachings and practice.
So Eric, I'll just chime in. This is the one that we've talked about, that we have some concerns because we really don't know what well-recognized religion means. So
and bona fide, yeah.
Yeah, so bona fide church or well-recognized. So hopefully Los Altos, we won't have to be the first city to determine what that means, but we have flagged that is an issue. So
yeah. Okay, so if you are a religious institution affiliated housing development project, because the land that the housing development project is located on is owned by a religious institution, and it's on, adjacent to, within 1/10 of a mile of a church, synagogue, temple, mosque parking lot, then the religious institution may remove up to half of the religious use parking on the site and use that land to build the housing development project. Even if that place of worship was already had a parking deficit. It doesn't matter. Up to half the parking spaces can be removed and used for housing. The remaining half of the spaces count toward the parking that's required of the housing development project. And the developer cannot be required to replace the eliminated parking spaces. So I struggled with this language, and after reading the league's interpretation, I've reached the conclusion that what the legislature meant is generally that the developer can't be required to provide more parking than what's left for both the place of worship and the housing development project. Except that typically the developer can be required to ensure that that means that there's at least one space per unit. So what we're looking at here is a housing development project and the place of worship sharing parking spaces in the place of worship's parking lot.
I'll kind of chime in here. A lot of times, I think this has been used in other contexts where years ago there was a lot of empty light industrial buildings, and so a lot of those churches and religious institutions were going in there, and one of the impacts was parking, but because the religious institution had weekend hours or evening hours, there was all this shared parking that could happen, and there wouldn't be parking impacts because the surrounding areas were businesses and they weren't using the surrounding parking at the same time. And now that I've been through this PowerPoint and I've been looking at this law and thinking about it, is there is a lot of parking at religious institutional facilities that is just open, dormant, and not really used. And so I think what this is trying to do is create housing with religious institutions and provide for shared parking. And I can see where they're going with it, but I'm really not sure how it's really going to work. So that's just my opinion. It's not the, but I do know that, churches and surrounding businesses share parking all the time because their uses and their time, they don't overlap. And so this sort of takes that to a whole new level where it becomes more permanent with the housing there. So it remains to see how this really works and how this parking is going to actually work out. So that's my comment.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful to put this into context.
I have a quick question. Is there a minimum of the religious institution that you have to save in order to kind of go along with this? Or yeah, I wasn't sure.
That's a good question. So we're only eliminating parking. We're not eliminating any other. The religious institution isn't allowed necessarily to remove any other features of their project for the housing. And it's 50% of the parking. They need to keep at least half of the parking.
So Eric, this is Guido. So if a church is required to have 50 spaces, 25 of those could be eaten up by the.
So remember, if they have an existing deficit, they can still apply for this. So instead of saying if they're required to have 50, let's say they have 50, 25 of them can be eaten up for the housing, except that this last bullet point is the really confusing one, in my opinion. I had to read this several times before it sunk in, the way it's actually worded in the statute. You can still require that there be at least one space per housing unit in the shared parking, even if that's more than 50% of the original number of spaces, unless, so that's an exception, and then the exception has two exceptions. If the project is within a half mile of transit, or it's within 1 block of a car share space, and it just says 1/2 mile of transit, so not necessarily a high quality transit corridor, if I'm remembering the language correctly. Most places in Silicon Valley are probably going to be close to transit. If it's within a half mile of transit or within a block of car share space, then you don't have to guarantee that one space. So to try to say that one last time, you can eliminate up to half the parking, except that you can still require the developer to make sure there's at least one space left per housing unit, unless we're within a half mile of transit or within a block of a car share. Then you can't require the one space.
Got it.
And then also, so in that example of the 50 and then 25, the 25 for the church would have to be coordinated so that that's enough parking for the church, and then the 25.
You broke up there, Chair.
Want to make sure there's enough parking for everyone. The property owner's going to have to figure that out.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, how to coordinate it. Any questions on that one?
Well, I was just going to say that, Eric, this is the other Eric, that last bullet point seems to be a nod to the density bonus law and to the various attempts to coordinate the transit village type settings and that sort of thing that have shown up. So as we lurch in the direction of no parking, this is another step in that direction. But it does seem to be a sort of acknowledgement that parking is always a problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret that Sacramento doesn't want us to encourage people to own cars anymore. I mean, I'm not expressing an opinion that that's a fact, that it's the state planning policy of the state to get people out of their cars and living close to transit and having fewer cars per household. And a lot of these laws are aimed at that because parking takes up space.
Yeah, this is the carrot to get people out of the cars. So you build near transit and get people out of cars, and then you get all this extra density and all these extra perks and benefits. So
Well,
And this-
that's because the government code is set up so that the housing serves transit, which serves clean air.
Right.
Because all of this goes to the Clean Air Resources Board, you know, their thing. So it's all to remove smog from the equation.
Right. Right. That is absolutely the goal of all of these policies.
Yeah.
Okay. The next bill I want to talk about, and I'm actually getting close to the end here, so, is
This is my
AB is AB 2345, and this law makes some amendments to the density bonus law. And I promised Guido, but I forgot to set it up, that I was going to show.
Oh, it's okay, Eric. It's okay.
Okay. Oh, shoot, I should have done that. I'm not going to go into super great detail because with this one, you have to look at the code and see how it affects an individual project. But one thing that it does is I talked about the 4 things you get if you provide certain levels of affordability. You get increases in density, you get a certain number of concessions, which are designed to make the project less expensive to build. You get waivers, and you get automatic parking reductions. One thing that this does is, and I'm sorry, the statute uses 2 words for the same thing. It calls concessions, it refers to concessions and incentives, and I should have used the word concession throughout. They're the same thing. Where it says incentives, I mean the same thing as concession. It reduces the threshold for getting concessions slightly. So with a little bit less affordable housing, you can get your second concession. So that's one thing it does. The other thing is that the maximum density bonus before, except in the case of what I call a super density bonus, was 50%. So a super density bonus is a 100% affordable project, and density bonus gives a very generous the law gives a very generous bonus for that. But otherwise, if the project wasn't 100% affordable, the maximum density bonus is 35%. As of January 1st, you can keep providing more affordability than, so right now at 11% very low income, you get your 35% bonus. If you were to provide 50% very low income, you still only get a 35% bonus. Now, if you go past that 11, you get a higher bonus all the way up to 50%. I think I made that more complicated than I had to, but you can get up to a 50% bonus now by providing deeper levels of affordability. There's a term in the density bonus law that appears throughout that refers to a project being within a half mile of a major transit stop. And there's another term related to that, that's unobstructed access. And it was never really clear exactly what those terms meant, and now there's very clear definitions, which is helpful. There are some minor amendments to the automatic parking reduction standards. And then there's an additional reporting requirement. Every year, the city has to produce an annual report to HCD relating to the city's housing element. And now there's going to be another section in there about density bonus projects. So this will encourage deeper levels of affordability in housing projects. And then the last one, you guys just approved your ADU ordinance, and now the state's making some minor changes to that. There are some other aspects of AB 3182 that I'm not going to go into that affect homeowners associations. That's not really relevant to what you guys do at all. But it does make some minor tweaks to the ADU statute that went into effect as of January 1st of this year. It's already true that if a city doesn't have an ADU ordinance, If it takes more than 60 days to approve the use permit or the design permit, not the building permit, for the ADU, that the ADU is deemed approved. This extends that to the situation where the agency does have an ADU ordinance.
Completed application.
Right. So, so if the applicant submits an application and within 60 days the city hasn't approved the design review or the use permit, then that's deemed approved. That does not apply to the building permit. And let's see, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. So that's the one minor tweak we have to ADU law this year. I think because of COVID, we got a little bit of a reprieve. Otherwise, we probably would have had more. And that's it. Are there any questions about the new laws? Okay.
Any questions? I think we're good. Yeah, I'm sure we'll have questions when something comes up though.
Yeah.
There will be a quiz later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's
3182.
just, one thing I would just like to say is that, one, thank you, Eric. And two, if you want to hear this again, we will be bringing this to council when the new council gets seated. And again, the training that we've been doing with staff on SB 330 and the applications and SB 35 and just going through completeness of applications and consistency requirements, we're doing a lot of that training with staff as we're going through this in preparation for when we get our objective standards, because we're doing the objective standards and those are what we need to apply for the consistency requirements when we get our objective standards. So with SB 330, you have the application and that has completeness issues, and we have that checklist. And then when it goes into the review for consistency, at some point we will have our objective standards, and then all those pieces of this puzzle will fit together until they change everything again, and then we'll be scrambling and trying to fix that all over again. So but the law changes, we react, and we get caught up, the law changes, and so it's this ongoing trying to catch up. It was nice this year we didn't have, I don't know, the 16 or 20 bills that we had last year that we were all scrambling to try to figure out. So I'm just glad we don't have to go through all those ADU bills again. I know, and I think Guido was like, we were all like, we just want to get this ADU done and have HCD bless it so we can move on until they change it again. So anyway.
Can I add one thing to what you're doing with respect to all this? One of the things that some of these do is to establish procedures, and these were already sort of in some of these. I'm thinking about SB 35 particularly, but some other things, which includes gathering information from an applicant relevant to various claims that could be made under something like SB 35 or some of these others with respect to the cost of not getting a waiver or the cost of not getting an incentive. We can actually get information about the cost of doing something, and I would hope that we would have some sort of checklist that we could use at the staff level to gather this information, because otherwise the city doesn't have any way of meeting its burden, because the city has the burden of showing that it would be economically feasible or whatever. And it provides specifically for that. So I mean, that would be very helpful to have that along the way.
That's under density bonus law. In density bonus law, the language that's stated now just says we may require reasonable documentation, and that is sort of up to the jurisdiction's reasonable documentation. And Eric, you know a lot about that, but we've seen it vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some want pro formas, some want a pro forma that is independently reviewed by an outside agency.
Economist.
Yeah, an analyst. And then others, if there's just evidence that it does provide cost saving, then the city can rely on that evidence submitted by the applicant that it does show an identifiable cost reduction. And that has not been defined, and right now it's only reasonable accommodation. And Eric, if you want to add to that, you jump.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. The statute just says you can request reasonable documentation, and nobody really knows what that means because it hasn't been tested by a court yet. So every city has its own standards for how extreme you can be. I've represented cities that have asked for the sun and the moon and the stars, which is one extreme, and I've represented a city that was very pro-housing and just would say, well, that sounds like it's cheaper, that's good.
Well, I guess my question is, do we have such standards?
Yes,
I mean,
the city does have a density bonus checklist. So the city has a number of different, Guido can explain this better than I can, so feel free to step in, Guido, but the city has a number of different guidance documents and checklists, and so so when a pre-app is received, and one nice thing about the pre-app under SB 330 is when the pre-app is received, we kind of know what forms and what checklists and what documents to give the developer based on the kind of project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wait, the city's code does include the reasonable documentation language, so it's already in our local code. So
we have submittal handouts, and tonight actually has a density bonus report as part of the attachment to the staff report.
Right.
So,
no, I'm just thinking that I have witnessed applicants coming with actually very specific numbers that we hear only later on. And I'm wondering if it's possible to ask them to provide these kinds of, because that's what they have to do in order to, figure out the development. It has to make money, right? And they're interested in knowing what kind of money it could make out. This is not it'll pencil out at the end. They usually know, and so I'm just wondering what we can do to make sure we get whatever they have, even if it's guesswork, right? Which is going to be perhaps early on.
I'll
so
let
they
Guido,
share with us so that we know what they're thinking of, so that we have some way of dealing with it. I mean, because otherwise they'll come and say, well, sure. I mean, it'll be cheaper if you let us do this. And how do we know, right?
well, once again, it goes back to a reasonable. We want to be
a lawyer's favorite word, Guido. I love it. Right? I mean,
but Guido, we do ask for that with their preliminary application, and we do want that as part of their completeness. So we ask for, if they're asking for incentives or concessions, we want them to provide the documentation. So we do that at the very beginning.
And the applicant tonight after this project did have a density bonus report that is an attachment to the staff report. So
yes, yeah, no, we haven't always seen that. So I'm hoping that as I was reviewing the statutes, that attracted my attention, and particularly because SB 35 now, was it AB 831. Providing a little bit of a speed bump for SB 35. And I'm wondering if we can find out whether there's any Native American tribe with an interest in Los Altos. That sure would be interesting information. But, I mean, it does provide an opportunity to require that, the developer sort of put his cards on the table early on in the process. And I would just like to make sure that we're taking advantage of that fact. Whatever that means. I understand that, until somebody sues, we won't know what it really means. But, that we're taking advantage of the ability to gather information early in the process.
Yeah, and again, the city does have a density bonus checklist with instructions for what to submit.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Eric.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll leave it
Yes. Good report.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
Eric.
good night. Bye-bye.
You don't get to go home.
All right, so we will move on to D190001 and TM190001, 140 Lyell Street.
Good
I'll
evening.
hand it to staff.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So I will be presenting the item. I took over this project from a contract planner when I started with the city. So the project before you tonight is for a design review and a vesting tentative map application for a new 5-unit condo project where a single family home exists at 140 Lyle. Just to provide some timeline and background for the project. In May of 2020, there was a community meeting held with neighboring property owners. On June 4th, there was a study session with the Planning Commission to get some initial feedback from the legislative body. Based on the feedback, the applicant did break up the massing, and then we're here tonight, obviously, for the public hearing tonight. So based on what the applicant heard, the applicant did break up the massing of the building along Gavilan. Instead of making one large building, each individual unit can be readily identified. The second story windows will all be frosted and the seal heights were increased to 44 inches. And the overall color palette was changed to a lighter hue to better fit within the neighborhood. Just wanted to provide some better context. The project is at the corner of Gavilan and Lyle, near San Antonio and Cuesta Drive. It does have the property has a zoning designation of R3 1.8. You can see that it does abut single family homes, which is some of the concern you'll hear tonight. The general plan designation is medium density residential. For the newer planning commissioners, it should be noted that the general plan has 7 required elements. One of the elements or chapters is the housing element. This chapter of the general plan has to be updated every 5 to 8 years, depending on what cycle of the RHNA cycle you are in. So the city can meet its regional housing needs allocation as identified by state HCD and ABAG MTC. So this property is listed as a housing opportunity site within the housing element. When the housing element was adopted by the city council and certified by the state, the recommended realistic density for this site is for 5 units. So the project is compliant with the general plan densities identified for the site. It also does actually help implement several housing element policies. Program 2.3.1, which requests that staff and the council and the commission implement density bonus. The policy specifically says continue to implement density bonus and other incentives as provided by state law and the city zoning ordinance. And program 4.3.4, continue to encourage maximum densities. So now that we've talked about the general plan, I'm now going to pivot to the zoning code. The project before you is generally consistent with the zoning code, with a few key exceptions. Eric has kind of gone over some of this already, but I will just reiterate. Because there is one affordable unit involved, and the one of the 5 represents 20% of the units, based on the city's density bonus ordinance, the applicant is entitled to 3 incentives for the project. And we'll go over incentives and concessions versus waivers. So the 3 concessions that the applicant are asking for, the first concession is related to height. Section 14.22100 limits the heights on this site to 15 feet if located within 100 feet of a single-family zone. The applicant is proposing a second story on each home with approximately 27-foot maximum. Second, the applicant requests a concession to reduce the interior setback, which as it's going up to 27 feet, to be 17 feet to 12.5 feet. And third, the applicant is requesting a concession from the side yard setback, which normally is 25 feet, to 15 feet. Finally, the applicant is requesting a density bonus waiver. I've quoted the entire section of the government code, but the real pertinent part here is the applicant is entitled to request waivers if they can demonstrate that if you don't give the waiver, it physically precludes the construction of the development. In terms of the design controls for the project, the exterior materials combines stucco first floor with a mix of horizontal and vertical siding on the second floor, each defining a specific building element. The colors have been selected to provide a distinct separation between units while being complementary to each other and the neighborhood. The colors also have the effect of breaking up the massing of the building. So I did highlight in the staff report and just wanted to show a key concern of mine was the potential privacy impacts for the westerly elevation. This is the side facing the existing condos to the west of the project. I've put a condition of approval number 2 to potentially mitigate those privacy impacts by requesting a 6-foot tall fence with a 2-foot lattice be installed, that all second floor windows be glazed, and that there be fast growing landscaping like Pittosporum or Carolina evergreen hedges. So throughout this process, the applicant has done above and beyond what's the minimum. There has been a community meeting as stated. I have given frequent updates to the neighborhood, which is just a good practice for urban planning. And I've just periodically updated people when I've gotten new plans just to get people's feedback. So there were quite a few emails that I've tried my best to email all of them to the Planning Commission. And I'm not here to rebut those comments, just to provide some context. There were some comments or concerns about the parking for the project. The project does meet the parking ordinance standards of 1 covered, 1 uncovered. There were concerns about the bulk and mass. The applicant did voluntarily drop the height down 2 feet. And there were concerns about potential access along Lyle. The project will have to provide curb, walk, side, and gutter and be ADA compliant. In terms of notification, all properties and tenants within 1,000 feet were notified. Story poles were installed. There was property posting. There was a community meeting, and I did at least 3 or 4 emails to people who participated in the community meeting of when the applicant had resubmitted. So the recommendation from staff today is to deem that the project is exempt from CEQA and to recommend approval of the design review application and the vesting tentative map to the City Council. And that concludes my initial presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Does anyone have questions for staff?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Guido, you mentioned on the westerly side, you talked about in the report, and you just mentioned that one of the conditions is glazing. Did you mean to say, as you did on the front of the building, that it is an opaque glazing, or just, glazing to me is just a glazed window, or does it have to be an opaque glazing?
I believe it's the opaque glazing, but the architect is on the call, and that's probably better directed towards him.
Yeah, it was not mentioned. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
To Guido, is the frosting going to be done on all windows or just on the rear windows that face the condo?
I wrote the condition to say the ones along the westerly, but it's completely within the commission discretion to ask for all of those.
Okay. I noticed in the papers we have that it says modifying the second story windows all be frosted and have the maximum sill height of 44 inches. So I didn't know if that applied to both. I don't know why it applied to the first floor when it's looking across the street at other apartments. But
Yeah, it was more directed towards the second floor
on the west.
along the westerly, but once again, it's within the commission's discretion to ask for more.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from Commission?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
For Guido. One, the fence that you're talking about on the west side, the 6 feet with a 2-foot lattice, is that 6+2 or is that 4+2?
6+2.
6+2. Okay, because there's a fence there right now, as a matter of fact, that's sort of that height between the two properties. I mean, that's not a question. I went up and looked. And so you're effectively replacing that fence. And the footprint of the building would be, if I understand, approximately what the footprint of the current building is. Does that sound about? Maybe that's the question better asked of the architect and the applicant. But
The footprint of the building. I mean,
in other words, the new building would occupy about as much space as because the coverage is within 1%. So I'm assuming it's about the same size in terms of its footprint on the property.
No, it would be substantially larger than the current house. I mean, you are adding.
No, it's larger than the house. I mean total, but I mean in terms of the how much of the lot is occupied by building. One is 39%, the other is 40% for coverage. So I'm assuming that and looking at it, it looked like it was about a 7.5 foot side clearance from the fence. So
Well, the 39% is the proposed project. The 40%
Right.
is the zoning standard. I'd have to go look in the plans to see kind of what's existing on the site for that, for what's the house now.
and again, the applicant may be in a better position to answer that question. It's just there's not a whole lot of extra space, so it looks like it would be similar to what is there now. Is I think my point to that. Okay, since there was so much question about parking, this obviously didn't go to complete streets, you know, and not everything does. But what triggers sending the project to complete streets as opposed to not, when there's a parking issue or a traffic issue?
Well, parking is not a CEQA issue. That's established case law.
Yeah.
In terms of going to complete streets, I mean, this is an infill project with only 5.
Yeah.
I'd have to pull up the policy in terms of what's the specific requirement, but it's a pretty, you know, pretty clear cut in terms of being an infill project per CEQA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then I have one typo in the findings. Under paragraph 2, you when you were doing it, it says 3 units, and later on it says 5. So that wants to get corrected under paragraph 2 of the findings.
Let me pull it up real quick. 1 second. Number 2. Oh, there you go. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
Appreciate that.
So other than that, it was a great report.
Thank you. No, I appreciate
So thank you. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you.
Okay, great. If there's no other questions for staff, then I'll leave it up to the applicant. Do they have a presentation?
They do.
Okay.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Samir Sharma. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. Can everybody see the first slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All righty. So today, as Guido has already given you a very good description of the project to date, we're dealing with a 5 condo / townhome style project, which is proposing 4 market rate units, 1 below market rate unit, specifically the very low category. These are intended to be for sale condominiums, and the occupants are intended to be homeowners. The floor plans range from 1,300 square feet to 1,400 square feet, all with one car garages. All 5 units are equivalent, that they all of them have 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and are all 2 stories. There are 2 on-site guest parking spots that we're providing, and 1 off-site guest parking spot. Just a quick snapshot of the site plan. Here you can see this is the Gabilan side, this is the Lyell side. Here you can see where the guest parking, on-site guest parking is being accommodated. You can see the curb cuts for the 4 units that are on the Gabilan side and the 1 unit on the Lyell side, just to give a quick idea. Here is an aerial view of the proposed development as it sits today. As you can see, the neighboring parcel is a multifamily development as well, and the other adjacent parcel is another multifamily development. Here you can see the proximity to the single family side of Lyell, as well as the multifamily units on Lyell as well. Just a quick rundown. We've had our first neighborhood outreach meeting on May 14th. The project received mostly positive feedback from the neighbors and was attended by 5 different neighbors in the general area. 3 major concerns that were discussed that night. One was pertaining to the project height, which Guido's already mentioned. We were proposing a 30-foot tall building at that time. Today, the maximum height of the building is at 26 feet 6 inches. The sidewalk connectivity between Lyell Street and Gabilan, that was also another concern. We are proposing to do complete sidewalks and abide by City of Los Altos public works and engineering requirements. And there were some issues and concerns about the privacy of the adjacent neighbors. I will talk about that here shortly. Next, we had a Planning Commission study session to get further feedback. The project received, again, very positive feedback from most of the planning commissioners. Some of the concerns seem to be consistent with a few of the planning commissioners that evening. Again, Guido's already mentioned this, but depending on architecture, we were talking about mass, better definition of individual units, possibly lighter colors and palettes to give a less dense feeling to the building and the units themselves. Once again, the sidewalk connectivity was an issue that came up that evening, and privacy as well. So on the privacy, we decided how to mitigate some of the major things. One is we intend to frost all the windows on the 2nd story of the units that are adjacent to the neighboring properties. Once again, Guido clarified the westerly side. On the trees, we're proposing to plant fast-growing trees on the perimeter of the development. We've got a little 3D rendering to kind of showcase how those could look in about a 3-year time frame. And on the fences, once again, we're installing a 6-foot tall fence along with a 2-foot tall lattice on top of it for privacy screening across the whole development. I'm going to let this run the first time the whole way through, so you guys get a very, very good idea of how the future development the proposed development could look, and then we'll go to the one with the trees. We also included the neighboring multifamily units to showcase kind of the realistic distance from our proposed new building as well. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. I won't take as long on this one. I just want to forward over. What we wanted to do was kind of showcase the landscaping that we're proposing and how it could look in about a 3-year time period. Okay, hopefully that gives everybody a good idea of kind of how the more mature landscaping could look. So in conclusion, some of the project goals and objectives, on this site that we feel like we're meeting is the development is proposing to build its maximum density as required by the current zoning. The project is also providing below market rate unit and 4 market rate units that is helping the city of Los Altos with its regional housing new allocation goals. And development is adjacent to and shares 2 property lines. Both adjacent neighbors are multifamily housing projects. We feel the addition of our project will fit right in with the existing landscape of the neighborhood. Thank you.
I have a question on the landscaping on the south. Is that existing or is that also new? Facing the apartment house on Gavin.
That's also new. That's
Wow.
also new.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about the landscaping on the west side. It appears that the landscaping, the taller landscaping, which would be on the east side, it's taller on the east side than on the west side, on the whole back side of the building. Is that accurate? Because that's the side of the building that's closer to the neighbors.
Correct. I think based on the proximity of how close the plants are being planted, the landscape architect, in discussions with the arborist, made a call on which type of plant is not only fast growing, but also can grow to certain heights in a limited time period.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm just saying the visuals on the west side of the building look lower
They
than
are.
visual.
They are lower because there's two different species of trees being proposed and two different sizes of trees being proposed per the landscape plan.
Right, but the bigger visual impact is actually on the west side of the building because the building's a lot closer.
Correct. You're right. And probably in further time, in more time, they will eventually grow to not as wide, but taller. So we just wanted to give a realistic depiction in a 3-year time period. So, because those plants being planted on the westerly side or the side with more of the neighbors are
Yeah.
15 gallon in size as they're planted.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're 24-inch box on the opposite side. I just have to go back and refer to the landscape sheets.
Is there a reason that you, I mean, I hear what you're saying in 3 years, but could you do 24 box?
I think we could. I just don't want to. I don't know if we'd be able to do them as close to each other. So I would have to refer to the landscape architect and the arborist just to make sure. But I have no issue with that at all if that was something that you guys would like to propose. So.
Okay.
So what you're saying is that the 15 gallon, you can plant closer together, thereby maximizing on a more timely basis the height. Whereas if you planted in the larger box containers, they'd be spread apart further and you wouldn't have the privacy.
That is correct. You got it. That's
Thank
correct.
you.
If I can inject the architect here a little bit, this is only a 9-foot backyard. So a 24-inch box is going to be further away from the rear fence as well. So it's just physically fitting large trees don't really work. So this is more of a hedge type plant. So it can be trimmed thinner and hopefully it'll grow high. I've got in there about 10, 12 feet tall. So it's not going to be 25 feet tall for the second story windows, but it's definitely going to protect the first story windows. Yeah, our second story windows are much further away from the property line than the neighbor's balcony edge. Those are very close.
Full disclosure, I lived at 130 Lyell, so I lived on that at that corner unit. So I am, and I have some empathy for some of the letters that came in with the neighbors talking about the views because I lived there for 6 months when I was renovating my home. So I definitely understand the conditions there. And that's why I brought up the frosted windows, because you could stand on the balcony outside the kitchen and the living room and I'm basically looking in your neighbor's bedroom. So that's why I had a concern over the density of the landscaping. So because that's probably the closest in that neighborhood, probably the closest dimension that buildings get to each other. I lived in that unit that's right next to the car that's in the driveway.
No.
Yeah, firsthand knowledge of the work in the corner.
Yeah.
And I understand that's the density and it fits our criteria. It's just I wanted to give them some protection.
May I ask which of the units you've designated for the BMR? Or have you done that?
We actually haven't designated a unit as a BMR yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just wanted to, just to clarify again, all 5 units are 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and pretty close in square footage, 1,300 square feet to 1,400 square feet. So.
Right, one's a little under 1,300 and a couple are a little over 1,400. So one of the things that we sometimes try to do is make sure that the BMR is not necessarily the smallest unit in the place. So that's something that that we would want to pay attention to.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see.
It wouldn't be the smallest one. We could, if that's something that you guys want to stipulate, I'm okay with that. So.
That's okay. That would be that's always a good thing.
Yep.
Well, I had a quick question about the, I don't know if this is maybe for the applicant or maybe for staff, but the sidewalk. So the sidewalk is on Lyell. It is basically right on the edge of the street, and then it separates as it curves around on Gavilan. But then you show it as still lining up with 438 Gavilan next door. Is that correct? It's going to basically, it's going to line up with that kind of, I wouldn't say they have a sidewalk, but it's basically, the idea is that it's going to line up. I wasn't sure about that transition.
Yes, it is supposed to line up. The civil engineer laid that out.
Okay.
So the two streets do have different, one sidewalk attached to the gutter, and the Gavilan, though, there is a planter strip there.
Yeah.
And so we're doing planter strip on the Gavilan side and not on the Lyle side. So
Okay.
it's trying to be consistent with it.
Yeah, because they don't really, they just have kind of a gravel kind of frontage. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure it's not going to look awkward with the brand new sidewalk. Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? If not, then I will open up for public comment. Do we have anyone that would like to give a comment on this project?
So Chair Ahi, let me open up.
Oh, okay.
I have, let's see, Kevin W. Kevin, this is Guido from the city. Did you want to comment?
Yes.
So you have 3 minutes to comment. So.
Okay. So my name is Kevin, and I currently live at 130 Lyle Street, and I'm the homeowner. And my concern with this development is the potential of the height of building blocking the sunshine into not only my unit, but all the units on the not only on the second floor, but on the first floor too. That could have a significant impact in the amount of sunshine we get during daytime.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for that comment. Is there anyone else that has a comment that's on the line?
I don't. Steve, I think is our senior planner on the phone. Let me just double check.
Okay.
Steve, is that you? Yeah, I believe Steve from one of the planners is. That's not.
Okay. Okay.
And I believe Chair Ahi, that is it.
That's it. Okay. So in that case, I will close public comment and I will now open it up for discussion. Is there anyone that would like to go first?
I'll be willing to go first.
Sure.
I like this, and I think that they've done a good job. The one concern that I have, and I understand exactly why they've done what they've done in terms of the very low income unit, is the difficulty. We've encountered this with other projects as well. The difficulty of having a very low income BMR unit in Los Altos. I don't see that Susan Russell is on the line. She often speaks about this. It's much easier to do a lower income, or moderate income unit than it is to do a very low income. Currently, the very low income level in Santa Clara County is a family of 4 earning up to $60,000. My understanding is that the purchaser's part of the BMR is either $200,000 or $250,000, which these days would require probably putting down $50,000 or $60,000 and then insurance and all the rest of it. And a family of 4 making $60,000 a year probably doesn't have $50,000 in cash plus qualifying for the mortgage. And so the experience in Los Altos and in Palo Alto and in Cupertino has been that it's very difficult to have for sale very low income units. And I understand, and in order to do this, given everything, I understand why that was chosen. It was done. What I want to suggest, and this is purely a suggestion because I would like to see this project go forward. I think that it should do it. I'm wondering if it would be possible, and this is sort of a kind of a applicant Guido Jolie sort of issue, throw out there the possibility of perhaps asking for a lower income unit. This would reduce the number of incentives or concessions to 2 under the density bonus law, but it seems to me that, for example, the third concession, particularly relating to the setbacks, basically what you have designed is a building that could fit in the middle of the block, but under the current law, it can't fit on the corner lot. So you're simply asking that 7.5 plus 5 feet be allowed, and you've got the inset. The second floor is smaller than the first floor, etc., as is required there. And it might be possible to make that, instead of making that an incentive, make that a waiver. And considering that it is something that probably would fly as an incentive, it would be easier to do. I understand that the standards are a little bit different, but I'm wondering, and this is something just to think about, it might be easier to redefine the BMR in a way that would make it possible to sell and still get all of the things that you want to have. So I'm throwing that out as a suggestion to make it easier to get this, because the council has not necessarily been particularly eager to approve very low income units, and people who have done these have found difficulty in getting funding and that sort of thing, since it is a for sale unit. So I'm throwing that out there sort of as a thought, because I would like to see this go forward, and that might be one way to do that. So just, be thinking about that is what I would say. Other than that, I think that it suits the neighborhood. In fact, it looks better than some of the stuff that's already there. It's unfortunate that it may have some sort of blocking effect on the place next door, but that is unfortunately the way these things work. It is perfectly consistent with the R3-1.8 standards. It's just that it happens to be across the street from a few R110, and therefore you have to cover for that. And that's why the choices were made that I just was referring to. But I think it looks good. I think that they have done to my untrained eye, a very nice job, and I would support this project going forward as it's been proposed, particularly given the willingness of the applicant to, for example, designate one of the middle-sized units perhaps as the BMR unit, and that sort of thing. So that would be my take at this stage.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Shelley, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you. And as I mentioned before, I have some empathy for the neighbor at 130 on the second floor, since I so enjoyed those views in the morning. But this project really meets our housing goals and is consistent with our zoning ordinances, and is compatible with the neighborhood. So, I am supportive of this project moving forward. I don't really know about the issues that Eric has brought up and how that would affect this going on to the next step for council approval. So I don't really have a comment on that. So, and thank you to the applicant for making those changes to accommodate the bulk and the mass of the building and the colors, and just have a look at that rear landscaping too, and allow those second story neighbors a little bit more privacy as they sit on their decks. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'll just go down the list. David, Merrick, would you like to go next?
Yeah. I think I agree with the last commissioner who spoke, and that I do have empathy for the people who are living close by, but I think that I don't see any reasons to object. I think that the builders did make the certain concessions, and so overall, I don't have any issues that I would raise with it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Next up, Richard. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
I think the applicant's done a very good job in trying to mitigate the issue with the privacy next door. I know I read some of the comments that had been submitted about children walking down the street and concerns of traffic. I think this project will help reduce some of the concern, because we'll have the curbs, the gutters, the sidewalks for a whole, almost from Gavilan to San Antonio with sidewalks, so the children will be able to walk on the sidewalk. There's a number of new houses. There's 2 currently under construction on Lyle. There's another one planned across the street on the other corner of Gavilan. And I think this will enhance some of the change in the neighborhood. There's a couple other new houses and remodeled houses further down. So I think he's done a good job. And the privacy issue and the sun, I don't know how much limitation of sun he's going to get. I was trying to think about the location because of the trees next door, but I can certainly understand that. I think I would go ahead and support the project as is. And in terms of the parking, he's got 1 parking stall as well as a garage. It's going to take 1 car off the street and put it on the driveway. So that's a positive from what we have now, where you have the cars lining on Gavilan up the street to the apartment house next door. That's all I've got.
Great. Thank you for those comments. And then Susan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sorry, let me just start the video. It's not working for some reason. Oops. I too support the project and echo the comments that I think the applicant has done a very good job of responding to the comments, both from the commission and the June meeting, from reading the minutes, and as well from the neighbors. I would like some staff clarification about the comment Eric made about the very low versus a less very low market rate unit, because one thing that I find appealing about this project is it's a 3-bedroom unit for a very low below market rate. And I think that's something we're desperately in need of. So can staff clarify, is that truly something that's achievable, or is it just too challenging?
Well, I think it's something worth exploring a little bit further. And I guess if the Planning Commission would like to recommend this project onto the council, I think it could do so, subject to staff further evaluating whether that requested incentive for the side yard setback, if some support can be developed to change that from an incentive to a waiver. And if so, that would be what we would carry forward to the city council for consideration, coupled with the change in the income category for the below market rate unit from low to very low. So it'll take a little bit more work on the part of us at staff level, but I think between the Planning Commission recommendation and before it gets in front of the city council, we can certainly evaluate it a little bit more. And as Commissioner Steinle mentioned, it seems like we could look at it in terms of this site allows the development of a 5-unit project. Is this reduction in the side yard setback necessary to accommodate a 5-unit project with units of the sizes that are being proposed?
I guess, John, my question was actually, I think, a little different. How difficult is it in Los Altos to actually have a for-sale unit that's very low?
Talking to our housing provider, our housing partner, Alta Housing, they have commented to me that they definitely prefer housing for lower income or very low income households to be rental rather than ownership units, because it is so hard for families in those income categories to meet the standards, to get the loans that are necessary, and then to continue to make payments, especially if they're looking at HOA dues, where those dues continue to go up and become and make the housing unit less affordable. So I think moving it from the income category of very low income unit to a low income unit is, as an ownership unit, is definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay.
And then one thing that I can comment on, I think am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. The one thing that we could look at is we could also look at maybe that unit, if we want to consider it very low, we maybe with the applicant's consent, we may look at it as a very low rental unit and be able to provide the very low housing without it being owner occupied. So, but we can look at all this stuff by the time we get from Planning Commission up to council, and the staff report will reflect that this was a concern that was raised, and we said that we would look into it and work with the applicant and see if this could work out. So
It's so rare to get a 3-bedroom unit that's very low income, so.
yes, and so we're hearing that you want a 3-bedroom unit that's very low, and staff, can you go try to make it work? That's what I'm hearing. So we'll look at it.
Okay.
Well, low or very low, depending on the circumstances and what can be supported from either an incentive standpoint or a waiver standpoint.
Okay.
I should clarify. My comments were based on what has happened actually in front of the city council. There is one project that has 6 BMR units that were, by agreement with the council, rental units, and the developer, this is Mircea, of course, was having some difficulty getting funding because of the number of rental units. The banks just didn't want to lend money with that many. And he came back and asked the council to change that, and the council declined. But there is that issue, and this has come up in other projects as well. That's why I'm sorry that Sue Russell isn't on the line, because she usually has all these numbers at her fingertips, and she will stand up at the council and say, these just don't work unless they are rentals. But that has a separate problem, and in these days, you know, raising money to develop these things is complicated in any case, but right now it's even worse. So I would like to see this project completed. I would like to see it done, and I don't want the fact, you know, I want it to pencil out, right? And I don't want it to be, you know, that this one unit, and I would love to see it to be very low, but our problem is it's Los Altos.
But exactly, I wouldn't want to burden our owner with having to have his financing upset because we deemed him to have a rental unit in his for sale project. So, you know, I want to, and I know we're not supposed to look at it from the economics, but Eric, I think you have a point, but I think we have to, confer with the applicant too about what his financing looks like.
Yeah.
Right. I just think there is a way to make it work within the terms of the density bonus law so that he can do this. You know, I mean, I think we all want it to happen, and I think it can happen. And I think my sense is the council, we don't know exactly what it's going to be wanting to do in January, but the council would go along with a good faith proposal that would make this work.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, and there are ways that this can be done, and we can look at all those options.
Right.
And so,
Two waivers would have to be granted.
yes, it would be one, the I forget whether it's second or third.
Right now there are 3 incentives: one for height,
Right.
one for the interior yard setback, one
Right.
for the side yard. So
Right.
one
This
of
would be
those,
the interior yard setback would become
of-
a waiver instead of an incentive or concession.
right. So the applicant would be required to rewrite their density bonus report to ask that be a waiver and that they physically could not build the building as they proposed without the waiver. So they would have
Right,
to.
and this is,
So.
yeah, this is where the point I was making about the what I call the footprint, about where the building actually is with respect to the property line. I don't know whether he would be able to build the building given the size of the lot, that it's a narrow, this is essentially a bunch of row houses, and which is something I'd like to see more of, and I sort of stick a pin in when we could get back to our objective standards. But this is essentially 5 row houses, and I'm not sure. I mean, I can see an argument being made that it would be a physical impossibility to construct these any other way, given the property and given where the line is, and it would basically comply with the R3-1.8 interior side yard requirement, except that it's on a corner lot. So
Commissioner Steinle, I understand what you're saying. I'm just pointing out that there's a little bit of work on the staff part, and then the applicant, like I said, has to go back to his attorney and redraft the density bonus report if the recommendation is to go from very low to low. So I understand.
the threshold question, whether or not they need to do that. And I think it seems like there's a discussion right now that assumes that is the case, and it may in fact be the case. But I would encourage us to say, let's have staff look at it before it goes to council. And if they can do very low and the applicant is comfortable with that, let's go do that. I think it makes sense for our community.
No, I agree. I'm just very concerned given what has happened, what I've seen happening over the last year and so, that, you know, I don't want them to go and propose something that the council is going to say, well, or, you know, I want them to be prepared for that eventuality as well. Rule 3 is always have a plan B. And I just want to propose a plan B here.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's something we can ask staff, which they've agreed they can look at and then make a recommendation.
Right. I agree with that.
So what we will do is, if you make your recommendation tonight, we'll look at it, and there's, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, we're looking at this from the density bonus law, and we want to make sure that we're not putting any restrictions on the applicant that they haven't agreed to as well. So.
Okay. Susan, did you have more comments or?
No, that's primarily, I would support this project.
Okay, great. I'll quickly run through. Yeah, I guess I'll just start off by saying I thought it was a little surprising to hear kind of comments about the size and scale from residents. You know, we talked about this at their first meeting, but this is an R3 zoning designation. So it was just surprising to hear that someone would want to make this a single story, 1-story home when there's, you know, projects right next door that are, I think, bigger, more dense, taller. So I hope residents just understand that this is an R3 and we don't have a lot of R3 in town. So we should take advantage of this. And with that said, I like the changes that have been made. I like the individuality that you gave the units. I like the sidewalk frontage and the corner condition. To me, this is the perfect example of a project that maximizes its development potential and, you know, creates more affordable units for our town, affordable by design units. So yeah, I like the project. I wish we had, you know, 10 more of these, to be honest. So yeah, I would recommend approval. I think as far as the BMR goes, I think if there's a way to make it work, where we can have the low instead of the very low and still make it work with the variances and the waivers, I think it's not a bad idea to recommend that to council. I'm sure council is going to have, you know, kind of their own opinions and thoughts on it. So all we can really do is make a strong recommendation one way or the other. I don't know if I'd be comfortable kind of forcing the applicant to make one of them a rental and putting him in that position. So I think if it pencils out for very low or for low, I think that would be my preference. For sale units. So yeah, so I would recommend approval, and if someone wants to make a motion, then that would be great.
Sure, I would move to approve. Oh, I don't have the language in front of me of the lot number. Guido, do you want to tell me the proper way to word this?
Sure, I'll put it up on the screen.
Okay.
Thank you, Guido.
And then I'll add the proviso that let me just add, and number 3 would be to work with city staff to identify if the BMR unit can become a low income, not a very low unit per density bonus law with a revised density bonus report with waivers and concessions.
Great.
Okay.
Sure. So I move to approve the 5-unit building at 140 Lyell, subject to the 3 conditions as set forth by staff.
I'll second that.
3 recommendations set forth by staff. Great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recommend the project to the city council, subject to staff evaluating the low versus very low income and developing support for waivers or concessions before it goes in front of the city council. Chair Ahi?
Yes.
Chair Ahi?
Oh, yes. Did you hear?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Sorry.
Oh,
about
okay. Sorry.
that. Commissioner Doran?
Yes.
Commissioner Merrick?
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger?
Yes.
Commissioner Roche?
Yes.
And Commissioner Steinle?
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0-1.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much to the applicant.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good project.
Yeah.
Well.
So we will move on now to commissioners' reports and comments and potential future agenda items. Anyone have anything? If not, we can just go to future agenda items.
So looking at the future, coming back to the Planning Commission at your meeting on December the 3rd are the objective standards. We're working with a consultant to gather information you had requested the last time you took up the objective standards and make some modifications to the standards that you reviewed. On the 8th of December, the new city council is getting sworn in. And then on the 15th of December, the new city council will hold their first meeting on agenda items. And we at the staff level may have for council consideration on that agenda a housing element update and the annual production report. We're still working on that. And then for the Planning Commission, coming back to you on the 17th of December is the boarding house regulations.
Mhm.
So that kind of wraps up the Planning Commission and City Council's work for related to land use for the remainder of the year, 2021.
So for the boarding house, we've got new people on board, no pun intended, but we've got, and as we went through it the last time, there was an ordinance proposed that would prohibit boarding houses, and after lengthy and very thorough and reasonable discussion, the Planning Commission recommended that we look at not prohibiting but regulating. So taking all those comments to heart, we're coming back with 2 ordinances, the one that we originally proposed and then one that is a balanced regulation ordinance. So both of those will be in front of you to make your decision to which one you want to recommend to the city council. So we were given council direction to do A, and you've come up with B. We're giving you A and B again, and you can look at both of them and give your recommendation on either one. So that's what will be coming back to you. So we're just trying to make sure that the Planning Commission has something that they want to recommend to the City Council. The City Council will have what they wanted to, their direction. So we now have 2 options. So just so no one's confused, that's the basis of having 2 ordinances coming back to you.
I have a question, Chair.
Yes.
I wonder, at our last meeting on objective standards, I believe it was mentioned, but I wanted to make sure that the consultants would provide us with a list of addresses and nearby cities of buildings that fall into their objective standards that they may have been involved with, so that we can take a look at, I hated to use the word cookie cutter, but cookie cutter buildings, so that we'll be able to make an intelligent decision when we get to those standards.
Yes, we are working on that with the consultants, so they would be bringing back that information. It'd be part of your packet that goes out to the commission.
It would be ideal if we'd got that ahead of time, so that at the meeting, we would be able to say that I've driven by the building at ABC and it looks good, or it looks like a cookie cutter. You know.
You will be getting it ahead of time because we have a holiday week next week, so we need to get
Really?
the packet by next
Yes.
Tuesday.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you'll get a few days
Way ahead
advance.
of time.
That's about turkey, bunch of turkey stuff going on.
Yeah.
A holiday that none of us are gathering, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I second that.
Right.
Thank you.
Along those lines, John and Guido, can I ask you that if you would send the consultants Guido's wonderful report on 140 Lyell, because it's an example of the kind of project that comes to us, and an example of some of my concerns about some of the things that they have proposed. And I don't want to throw it at them at the meeting and say, well, what do you say about this? They should get a chance to look at it, but I'm going to have some questions. Now that we have approved this project, it's a very typical, I'd like to say, much more typical. I echo what Maris said. This is the kind of thing we would like to see more of. And you know, if you look at their proposed objective standards for the R3-1.8 district, we would not be able to consider this project if we applied those standards, in my view. So I'd like to get them to react to an actual project that came to us that I think is much more typical of the kind of thing that we see than perhaps, you know, things like along El Camino Real, which is a very special place. You know, it's much more like the stuff along First Street, the kinds of things that have been proposed in like Loyola Corners and that sort of thing. And so I'd like to make sure that the objective standards match what actually is done here. And so I think that it would be helpful for them to look at that and be prepared to talk about how that fits in with their standards that they're proposing. So
Okay, I can send it to them. I'm sending
send
it
that to them.
I'm sending it to them. So.
Great, and warn them that there will be a quiz.
Oh. I just emailed them the staff report and the.
Great. Okay, and again, Guido, it was a great report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Although interestingly enough, I can see some applicability with the one of the new state laws regarding religious institutions and their use of properties.
Yeah.
You know, coming up relative to what we talked about tonight. So.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 We have homework too.
We do. No, we do, because I think we need to study that, especially in some of the larger lots in Los Altos.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Well, and then the other thing is not to get into an off-topic discussion, but I'm not sure that we have any tribal cultural resources except for, I believe, Redwood Grove would be one from years ago, and I thought that there was some Indian historic cultural significance of Redwood Grove, but again, that's a city park and we wouldn't be developing it. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it is interesting to think about, do we have any Indian tribal cultural resources in our
Although we
area?
have experience with building along creeks, and we
No,
have
it's serious.
Los Altos, we may find out that we have more than we thought about. Yeah, we found
Yes,
that.
anywhere along the creek, yeah, because I started at Santa Clara in the city attorney's office, and so the Guadalupe area was very much,
Sure.
yeah, and then also around the Santa Clara University.
At Palo Alto on Matadero Creek around Stanford, there's a lot of Ohlone, you know, very
Yes, a lot of, yeah. So it's just something that we haven't thought about, but it's now we are going to have to think about it. So
Yeah.
it was nice that we had the training today. So we're all going to be more aware of those issues.
Need more research.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of Indian findings off of back of Stanford Shopping Center on Stanford land there along the creek. And
Yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me at all with the grove that somebody mentioned, if we didn't find some areas where they camped. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll get Father Juniper Sher's book out and see if we can find where the spots were.
Give us homework, will you? Yeah.
You'll bring us a report next time, Richard, right?
And that is our that is our goal. John and our goal is just if we hear of new laws, we try to brief the commission, just because you are the advisory land use body. So that this was one in a series of trainings we'll do with the commission, just to keep the body appraised of changes in the law. So
It was very helpful, and we'd be very appreciative if you could send out that slide deck, because I think it's a good reference for us. Thank you.
okay,
Do that.
we'll do that.
Great.
All right.
Good report, and Eric did a great job too.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Not you, Eric, the other Eric.
I'm taking credit for everything. No, his
All
report was
right.
very good. I
Maris,
appreciate
we're going
it.
down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, then it's 9:10 and meeting is adjourned. So thank you.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy